the beginning of the last decade, lots and lots of mobile devices were introduced into the consumer's hand, and the necessity of the developer to come up with websites that works on each of these devices became increasingly hard. I mean, think about it. Samsung alone has about 1,000 number of devices that range from 4 inches to 10 inches. And with the era of phones, smartphones, tablets and phablets, it was obvious that we need to change something in the way we design websites that could appeal to all these devices in the market. Many came up with different frameworks, but there's gonna be only one thing that took everybody's attention, and that's gonna be Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a free and open source front-end only framework written only using JavaScript and a lot of CSS. Alright, to install Bootstrap, just head over to getbootstrap.com, which is conveniently named, and just go for the download, which says compiled and minified files. And if you look in it, there's going to be 3 folders: JavaScript, CSS and fonts. To install the framework, you just have to download the CSS files and the JavaScript file and put it in your directory, and you should be able to just install it just like that. Place these folders in the same directory as your HTML and you should be good to go. Now head over to your HTML and link them up just like this. If you're wondering why to put it at the end, why can't we just put everything in the header? Well, the reason is that since these scripts are on the little bit on the heavy side, it might take few minutes to load up on the worst internet connection, and we probably shouldn't keep the visitors waiting for that script. But if we put it at the end, then the user can actually see the content right away, and once the scripts get loaded up, it'll show up and everything's good. Alternatively, you could just point at the online resource through Bootstrap CDN, but this would only work on the internet, so let's stick for the downloads for now. The next thing is to learn about Bootstrap's grid system. If you're familiar with HTML, you would know that it has its own grid system, but the Bootstrap grid system is intended to make it easier for the developer. The golden rules of the Bootstrap grid system is to be mobile first. Whatever the website you intend to make has to be designed first for the mobile devices and then for the others. Since Bootstrap is written mostly using CSS, placing the right CSS rule on the right element is all it takes to apply Bootstrap to your website. Before we write our content onto our website, we should first think about the layout of this information. I mean, what goes where, what goes on the side, what goes on the top and what goes on the bottom, etc. It's good practice to draw out the layout on a piece of paper before you attempt to make it on the editor, and it gives you a good idea of how to organize your HTML. Now that you got your design ready, now it's time to break down your design into series of rows and columns. Make it easier for Bootstrap to transit over into a different viewport if needed be. Bootstrap's entire grid system works assuming that you have your content in a combination of rows and columns. Now you need to group your elements into either rows or columns, keeping these rules in mind. Number 1. No elements should be nested under of its same kind. Don't nest row inside of a row or a column inside of a column. Rule number 2. Every element must be placed inside of a row or a column. And rule number 3. And the size constraints of the columns should not exceed the collective sum of 12. Okay, you might be thinking what this size constraint is about, but before we get to that, let's take a look how we actually apply rows and columns into our design. For now, let's think of the first 2 rules and try to break down your website into rows and columns, like this, or perhaps like this. I mean, well, there's more than just one way of doing it. It basically depends on your design. As long as it doesn't break any of the rules, it should be generally fine. And once you figure out what's the layout gonna be, now it's time to code it up on the HTML. Yes, you heard it right, we don't even have to write CSS at all. All this is simply done by placing the right style rule into the right place. We start off by wrapping all the elements to be represented in the grid system using a div and with a class type of container. This tells Bootstrap that I want these elements to be represented inside of a grid, and Bootstrap understands. Now we just have to wrap all the content of a row with a div, which attributed with a class of a row, and wrap all the columns which attributed with the class of a column. Easy, right? Well, no. Okay, now we got that done and out of the way. What was that size constraint about? Remember, our website has to fit inside of a tiny display, and there might not be enough space to fit everything in. Everybody's alright with scrolling forever, and therefore we can have infinite number of rows, but everybody absolutely hates scrolling sideways. Because of this reason, Bootstrap only allows you to have up to 12 columns in a given row. But this doesn't mean you should use all 12 columns in every row. This means that you want to divide your website real estate into columns, and each of these columns should add up to 12 units of division exactly. Why 12, you may ask? Well, Bootstrap developers came up with 12 unit system because it gives us developers enough combinations of divisions and ratios so we can manage the website's real estate more easily. Let's look at this in more detail. Say if you have 3 promotional banners that you need to be displayed on your web page, and to do this you have to group all your promotional banners into one single row first to keep up with the first rule. Then you need to divide each of these banners into different columns. If you want these columns to take equal size on the real estate on the website, you then need to have, since 12 divided by 3 is 4, and you just have to modify the class into column XS4 for each of the columns, and voila, you have done it. Everything's cool, isn't it? Well, not yet. Except if you look at this website from a smaller screen, it would look like this. Yes, that's a website for ants. This is bad. It's not mobile first. If there was only a way to dynamically change and determine what sort of a device the user is using to view the website, to tailor the content accordingly. And most of the time, the big websites have done it just like that. They used to have a different website for their mobile devices, and they usually hosted that under a different subdomain of the same domain, such like m.youtube.com or things like that. But now it's quite different. Conveniently, Bootstrap was designed keeping the unified design, diverse presentation philosophy on mind. This is where the viewport size constraint come into action. Remember the class called XS-4? Ever wondered what the XS stands for? If you did, XS stands for extra small, and matter of fact, there's other viewport sizes as well. There's SM for small, MD for medium size, and also LG for large devices. Depending on the viewport size, Bootstrap will automatically change constraints to follow what you have mentioned on the HTML. So by placing the promotional content in your columns like call XS12 and MD4, this changes the size constraints so that in small devices it would take the entire width, while in the medium-sized devices it would take one third of that width. This makes possible that you can read the website even on the small screens. It's usually good to start off the wireframe design from the mobile layout first and then extend it over to bigger displays. However, the point is that you need to use website real estate more effectively and make the content more accessible for all type of devices. And there you go. Now you've successfully designed your website content into different viewports and make your website mobile ready. Is this all Bootstrap does? Well, not really. Bootstrap also provides you a bunch of cool UI elements for you to use on your website. And this is one of the coolest things about Bootstrap framework. You no longer need to code your own UI elements, and you can just use Bootstrap's UI elements and make the experience of your website more consistent with the other websites out there. This is a topic to talk about of its own, so I'll catch you in the next video.